Let me just start by thanking the staff who's been wonderful to work with. Everybody I've talked to, everyone I've emailed, everyone who showed up today has been absolutely great. And I think that bodes well for the months to come as far as how the organization is going to grow and how this is all going to continue to gather momentum. I'd also like to thank my family for all their help setting up, for putting up with this, my kids, my wife. Thank you very much for giving up a Saturday that turned out to be a really nice day only because we got the tent, otherwise it would have rained. So welcome. So I'm not going to tell you why you should support Bernie Sanders. I'm only going to tell you why I do. And then I'll let him explain the rest. His service in Congress has been stellar, and he has been independent with a capital I and with a lowercase I. And those two uses of the word are key. For me, 22 years out of law school, I've spent my career trying to level the playing field for my clients and in certain issues, and he has done the same in his career in public service. So I'll leave you with 3 words and a thought. I'm supporting Bernie Sanders because of his commitment to causes which are just, his leadership, always speaking out, never bowing to pressure, never licking his finger and seeing which way the wind is blowing, and his commitment to opportunity. And let me just talk about that for one moment, and then I'll get out of the way and let you listen to who you came to hear. This has been a big week. We've heard a lot about equality, especially in the last 24 hours. But I think we all know that equality under the law doesn't mean much without equality of opportunity. And that's an incredibly important distinction, and that, at the end of the day, is what this campaign and this movement is about. There is a great new equality in this land, but there is still a huge inequality in terms of concentration of wealth, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, and Senator Sanders is, without a doubt, the best person to speak to that and to help us make some progress. So without further ado, I give you our future Democratic nominee and President of the United States.
Ron, thank you very much. Meredith, thank you very much. Sydney, thank you very much for allowing us to come to your beautiful home. Problem is, Ron just gave a better speech than I'm going to give. Thanks a lot, Ron.
His first lie on the campaign trail.
Let me tell you a little bit about what our campaign is about and how it is kind of different than typical campaigns. I'm the only candidate for president probably to ever tell his or her constituents that electing me or anybody else is nowhere near enough. We could have the best president that you can imagine. Honest, smart, hardworking, all that. And given the economic and political picture of today, that president will not be able to accomplish what has to be accomplished for the middle class and working families of this country because of the powers that exist in Washington right now. In other words, there is virtually no legislation right now, and it's obviously worse under the Republicans than under the Democrats. It wasn't so great under the Democrats. There's almost no legislation that comes to the floor of the House or the Senate which is not approved of by Wall Street, corporate America, and the billionaire class. That's just the simple reality. And let me repeat to you what I have said many, many times. I happen to be personally very fond of President Obama. He's a friend. He campaigned for me when I ran for the U.S. Senate the first time. I campaigned for him. And I think he has done a very good job in many respects. And I think history will judge him a lot better than his contemporaries do, given what he inherited when he came in. But, needless to say, I've disagreed with him on a number of issues, including this most recently TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. I have disagreed with him about extending Bush's tax breaks for the wealthy, and I was on the floor for 8.5 I was expressing my disagreement, and on other issues. But here is the main area where I have disagreed with this president. As all of you remember, in 2008, he ran a brilliant campaign, almost one of the great campaigns in American history. But what he did after the election, in so many words, was to say to the millions of people who were actively involved in his campaign, he said, "Thank you very much for electing me, but I'll take it from here." And I will sit down with John Boehner and I'll sit down with Mitch McConnell. We're going to work on some fair compromises and the country will be well served. He was wrong. He was wrong not only in that he underestimated Republican obstructionism, which was unprecedented, but he was wrong in not understanding that nothing can be done unless we have a strong, active grassroots movement that makes Washington an offer they can't refuse. And that is that we've got to change political consciousness so that people fully understand what's going on in Washington. And if Washington and Congress are prepared to vote against the needs of the elderly, the children, the middle class, the sick, the poor, they're going to pay a political price for that. So here is my pledge to you. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for supporting my candidacy to become President of the United States. But if you think you're going to be off the hook the day after the election, you are sorely mistaken. Because nothing will get accomplished unless millions of people are actively involved in the political process. Now, what I have done in my political career in Vermont, what we're doing in this election, is doing it differently again than most candidates. We don't start from the top on down. I don't have a super PAC. I don't have an enormous amount of establishment support. But what we are doing is getting many hundreds of thousands of people in every state in this country signing up to be actively involved in the political process. What we are doing is not having meetings with 100 people where folks are contributing $50,000 or $1 million to a super PAC. We're not doing that. We don't have a super PAC. We're not going to have a super PAC. But this is what we have done, which I think is pretty extraordinary. As of today, we already have some 200,000 Americans who have made individual contributions. How's that? And unlike Jeb Bush Jeb Bush goes to meetings and apparently he has to discourage people from contributing more than $1 million. It becomes embarrassing. Not one of my problems. Our average campaign contribution is $35. How's that? Now the question is, and this question we will see how it plays out because I don't know the answer. Can, in fact, in this day in American history, with Citizens United allowing the Koch brothers and other billionaires to buy elections, can we defeat them with small individual contributions? And you know what?
Let's find out.
Let's find out. That's the answer. We may not. We may not. Because the money that we have raised from 200,000 people is nothing for the Koch brothers. That's what they spend on breakfast. That's true. Right? That's the reality. I don't know that we can win. But I think, as Ron just said, we're going to give it a try. We're going to see what happens. Now, here's when I talk about grassroots activism and politics that goes from the base on up. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean. As Ron mentioned, all of us are proud, I hope all of us, and I believe all of us in this room, are proud that the Supreme Court every once in a while makes a decision that is right. And this week, actually, they made two decisions. Their batting average is pretty bad, but they've improved it a little bit this week. And here's the issue about gay marriage. If anybody thinks that this decision suddenly just popped out and that you had, was it 6 justices who suddenly were prepared to do the right thing, then you don't understand how politics works. This decision came about because for decades and decades and decades, gay Americans and their allies fought the fight on so many different fronts to end discrimination against gay people. That's what happened. And as a result of their efforts, we ended up having conservative states in America saying yes to gay marriage. Overwhelming majority of young people. I go out to high schools in Vermont and I say to the kids, well, what do you guys think about gay marriage? And they look at me with a blank stare, like, what is the issue? That's true. 10 years ago, that would not have been the case. So we have come a long way. But the point here is that did not happen without the struggle of people at the base. People who put their lives on the line, went to jail, died in some cases, making that fight. And we should be proud that as a nation we have come that far, and the Supreme Court basically recognized that. So let me give you other examples, because this is what my politics is about. It's not only the views that I'm going to express to you, it's the way I think we make change, from the base on up, not from the top on down. There was a poll in the Wall Street Journal last week. It was a very interesting poll. For many years, as all of you probably know, there has been a massive effort on the part of virtually all Republicans and some Democrats to cut Social Security. And I have, as somebody who founded the Defending Social Security Caucus, I thought that that was an absurd idea, that instead of cutting Social Security, what we needed to expand Social Security by lifting the cap on taxable income into Social Security. Okay? Now here is what happened. A lot of senior groups, a lot of unions, a lot of just middle-class Americans became aware of what was happening in Washington. And they said, this is absurd. You got seniors all over New Hampshire, Vermont, America, who are trying to live on $12,000, $13,000 a year. How dare you talk about cutting those benefits?
That's right.
Social Security, there was a poll last week, Wall Street Journal, by a percentage of 61% to 20%, the American people now believe that we should expand Social Security by lifting the cap on taxable income. Now, I know you're going to hear some Republican candidates coming to New Hampshire telling you why they think we should cut Social Security, but they are increasingly out of touch as to A, what should be the case, and B, where the American people are. That change in attitude did not happen overnight. For years in Washington, people are talking about cutting Social Security. Elizabeth Warren, myself, others, you helped change that discussion. That's how change takes place. Let me give you another example. For years, workers in this country have been working for starvation wages. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. You do the arithmetic. You multiply 7.25 times 40 hours times 50 weeks a year. It is income that people cannot clearly raise a family or even make it themselves, okay? What happened is that at the grassroots level, the SEIU or the unions, young people started taking to the streets. You saw that all over America. I had the privilege of being in North Carolina last year, meeting with young, mostly African-American people who are so brave in North Carolina and around the South, going out on strike, speaking up the need to raise the minimum wage. Started 3-4 years ago in many ways. The Wall Street Journal poll now says that by a percentage of 48 to 38, we should raise the minimum wage, not to the $10.10 an hour that is on the floor that Democrats have supported, but to $15 an hour. So it's just another example of where the people are ahead of even the good politicians. All right? And that's what this campaign is about. The main point that I want to make to you today is that the issues that I'm going to discuss with you briefly are mainstream issues that in virtually every instance have the support of the American people. If some of you here today pride yourself on being brave, courageous fighters for social justice, I got bad news for you. Much of what we're talking about is now mainstream America. The really courageous people are those Republicans who come to New Hampshire and say, we should give tax breaks to billionaires and cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now that is really courageous because they are way out of touch with where the American people are. All right? So let me tell you what we're trying to do in this campaign. What we are trying to do is build a strong grassroots movement, and we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. I suspect that in New Hampshire, by the time this campaign is over, we'll have had dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings like this. We will have spoken to 15 or 20,000 people in New Hampshire face to face. That is the old-fashioned way of doing politics. That's the way I do it. We have already spoken to over 5,000 people this morning in Nashua. We had 500 people out. Last month we had 1,000 out in Keene. We had 750 out in Portsmouth. And we're going to be talking to just all people all over this state. Now, what are the issues that we're talking about, that we're bringing out on the table? Number one, most importantly, the great moral, economic, and political issue of our time is income and wealth inequality. That is the issue. Now, why is that an important issue? It's an important issue from a moral perspective, in the sense that, do we feel comfortable that we are seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires at the same time as we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth? Is that what America is supposed to be about? I don't think so. It is important from an economic perspective, in the sense that if you have tens of millions of people who literally have nothing in the bank, who have to spend every nickel that they get just to survive, they do not have the disposable income to spend to create the jobs that we need. So what we have got to do is put more money into the hands of working families. And here's the simple truth. Since 1985, there has been a massive transfer of wealth in this country from the middle class and working families to the top 0.1%. Trillions of dollars. Today, the top 0.1% owns about 22% of the wealth in America. The bottom 90% owns 23% of the wealth in America. So the top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today in America, you got one family, the Walton family of Walmarts, that owns more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. What do you think about that? In the last 2 years, you've had 14 wealthiest people in this country saw their wealth increase by $157 billion, which is more wealth increased in 2 years than the bottom 130 million Americans have. This is what we're talking about. So from a moral perspective, from an economic perspective, I think this is unsustainable. But also from a political perspective, this is where you're at. All of you are aware of the disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. And that will go down in history as one of the worst decisions ever made by a Supreme Court. Now, what that decision said, it was 5 years ago now, what that decision said to the very wealthiest people in this country is, hey guys, you already own much of our economy. Now we're going to give you the opportunity to own the United States government. And what is happening in this election cycle alone is the Koch brothers themselves, the second wealthiest family in America, an extreme right-wing family. They will spend almost $1 billion electing Republicans whose job it will be to make the rich richer and everybody else poorer. Koch brothers, the media doesn't write about this at all. Koch brothers believe that we should end Social Security, end Medicare, end Medicaid. Their idea of freedom is that when you are old and sick, maybe somebody will throw you a few bucks to help you with health care, because Medicare and Medicaid will not be there. Okay? They will spend in this campaign more money than either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So you've got one family that has a political organization and money, more money than either of the two major political parties. That, to me, does not sound like democracy. That sounds like oligarchy, and we have got to stop that.